Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to the Chem Lab. If you've been following us recently, you'll know that we've been writing formulas for ionic compounds in all their different ways, and now we need to start doing the reverse. We need to be given the formula and come up with an appropriate name for those ionic compounds. And that's what we're going to start in this episode. Again, there are 4 different ways to do it, and we're going to get started with some binary ionic compounds. So grab your periodic tables, and let's get started. In order to name compounds properly, we need to know the names of the ions themselves that are making up the compound. And there are 4 different types of ions. If you've been following along, you know this. There are some regular metal ions, like sodium and aluminum. They only have one possible charge, and so we're just going to name those as the metal that they are. We're not going to change any endings to it. Transition metals, they need a little extra special care because they have more than one possible charge, and they get named with a Roman numeral. Okay? Simple monatomic ions like chloride, oxide, iodide, they get named, but we do change the ending when they're in a compound to show that they're in a compound, and we use the ending IDE for monatomic anions. And polyatomic ions, most of them end in ite or ate. There are a couple exceptions like hydroxide and cyanide, but for the most part, they end in ite or ate, and you just have to look on your chart to find out what their name is. So that's the chart we've been using lately. Here we have the same thing in words. If you'd like to pause the video and write that down, metal ions are named without changing the ending. The transition metal ions get a Roman numeral, nonmetals with "ide", polyatomics with "ite" or "ate". Let's look at some examples. Okay, so in these examples, you'll see them first a couple of regular metals, just name them: aluminum ion, barium ion. Cobalt can have more than one possible charge, so it either gets a 2 or a 3 to tell which charge it is. Chloride, selenide, and oxide are all monatomic anions, and they all end in IDE. And then we have sulfite and perchlorate. I just chose those two off the polyatomic ions chart. So some examples of that. So when you're naming ionic compounds, it's easy to get carried away and writing down more than what you need to do. So let's start with these here, and I'm going to give you a sort of a laser focus kind of moment. When you're naming ionic compounds, name the metal. Just whatever metal is there, just write it down. And you don't have to say the word ion, just say it's, cobalt or, sodium or strontium. Check to see if it needs a Roman numeral. This is where you're going to need your periodic chart of ions. Use the Roman numeral that balances the negative side. We'll get to that in the next video. If the anion is only one element, use the ending IDE. And if the anion has more than one element, use ate or ite off of your polyatomic ions chart. The key here is that when you're naming ionic compounds, you should only use 2 words in the name. Regardless of what's there, only use 2 words. Okay? So let's get into some examples. So in my first example, I see CaF2, and I recognize calcium as a metal, so I'm dealing with an ionic compound. So I'm just going to name it. So calcium. Okay. And then I look at whatever's left. Whatever's left, I want to name that with 1 word. And yes, there are 2 of them, but only 1 word. So 2 words total. And this is the fluoride ion. And there are 2 of them. Do I have to note that there's 2 of them? The answer is no. You're simply naming the 2 ions that are there. So calcium fluoride. Okay, that's it. Yes, we made 2 of them to balance the charges if we were writing the formula, but the name simply lists which 2 ions are hooked up, calcium and fluoride. Same with rubidium is next. Rubidium, that's the first element. Yes, there are 2 of them, but that doesn't matter in the name. We're just naming which ions. And then oxygen is the monatomic anion that is left, and so that would be oxide. So rubidium oxide. Okay, this is our pause the video moment for this very short video. Take a moment and look at your periodic table and see if you can correctly name these 2 ionic compounds. I'll see you back here in a couple seconds. All right, and if you came up with beryllium sulfide and aluminum chloride, then congratulations, you've now mastered ionic compounds, binary ionic compounds, and their names. We'll get to some transition elements in our next video, so stay tuned. And in the meantime, happy studying and have a great day.